One of my absolute favorite ways to catch a bass during the summer is with a topwater popping style bait like the one that I have right here. I think with the invention of so many different walking style baits and whopper ploppers and other topwater baits, that popper has kind of really gone on the back burner. It's really become an overlooked topwater bait, and I have seen days out on the water during the summer where this is the only topwater bait that they will bite. And today I'm going to go over everything popper fishing. I'm going to talk about the types of poppers that I like to find and how I like to work them, as well as the equipment that I use. So let's dive on in. Now, there are a ton of different poppers out there on the market. Pretty much every single major brand or manufacturer has their own version of a popper. And one thing that I found with poppers that's a little bit different than a lot of your other topwater baits is that these baits from different manufacturers can be vastly different than each other manufacturer out there. If you look at a bait like a topwater spook, a walking style bait, they all pretty much look the same. They all pretty much do the exact same thing in the water. They're gonna walk back and forth. But when it comes to that popper style bait, you will pick up poppers that have vastly different actions than other poppers. They're all a little bit different. Now, there are a few brands that I really like, and I'm just gonna let you guys know that you can go out there and fish any brand that you want, and you might find some really good poppers, and I highly suggest you do that. These are the ones that I have a lot of confidence in that I'm going to show you right now. The first one is the KVD Splash. This is one of my favorite poppers out there on the market. One thing that I like about this popper is it's fairly inexpensive, and it's also a really good quality popper. I've caught a ton of fish. There's two different versions. There's the little bit bigger version, like the one that I have here, and then the KVD Splash Junior. I actually end up fishing this Splash Junior actually more than the bigger version, and the biggest reason that I like this bait is it's a great spitting bait. And we're going to talk about spitting and chugging and walking these baits in just a minute, but this particular bait is a great spitting bait. So what I do with this KVD Splash is I make it spit in the water, and it looks like a really small bait fish. If you have a lot of small minnow style bait fish in your waters or shad, that little KVD Junior is a great way to mimic those baits. So that's one of my first baits that I always have tied up. Now, over the last couple of years, I've actually grown really fond of these particular poppers right here. This is the Arc TP70, and like always, guys, I'm going to leave a link down below in the description for all these baits. But this bait to me is a great, very versatile popper. You can do a little bit of everything with this bait. You can chug it in the water. This is also one of the best walking popper style baits that I have fished. It really walks back and forth well, and the color schemes on these particular baits are phenomenal. Now, let's talk really quick about color, because I think that this is something that probably guys put way too much emphasis on when it comes to pretty much any lure, but especially when you're fishing a topwater bait. Now, to me, there's really three main colors that I'm going to use. The first one is going to be an opaque shad color popper. For instance, I have a bone colored popper right here. This KVD Splash right here, this is kind of more of a shad pattern. To me, these are pretty much the same color to a bass. They're going to see an opaque, whitish color. And what I mean by opaque is you can't see through this bait. Now, the next bait that I fish a lot are your translucent colors. So we have opaque that you can't see through a lot, and then you have translucent, which means you can see through them. So if you look at these baits right here, you can actually see through the baits right here. Now, I like to use these particular poppers a lot when I'm fishing in clear water conditions, especially if it's not super windy out. I don't want the bass to get too good a look at my bait, and so that's when I'm going to pick up these particular style baits. Now, the other color that I really like is a bluegill pattern. I fish a popper a lot when I'm targeting bluegill beds or around bass that are eating bluegill. And a bluegill pattern like this, I absolutely love in those situations. Probably to me, the most important thing is having a little bit of orange on the belly. The sides, they look like a bluegill, obviously, that looks great, but I think that a little bit of orange on the belly, which really looks exactly like those bluegill, is what I look for in a popper. Those are the three main colors that I pick up. Now there's one other color that to me is really kind of odd, but it just works, and that is straight black. I'm being 100% honest with you. You know, a lot of times I tell you to use dark, like black colors when you're fishing in dark conditions, but I've had a lot of success with a black popper like this in the middle of the sunniest, calmest, clearest water day that you have ever seen. It just doesn't really make sense, but it is a bait that they can see very easily. And to me, what I actually think that a black popper looks like to a bass are bugs. And I think that one thing that a lot of guys don't know is that bass eat a lot more bugs than we think. Even me recently, I've been catching even smallmouth bass that have little beetles in their mouth. Bass absolutely will eat mayflies a lot. They also eat a lot of dragonflies. So if you happen to think that the bass that you're catching are eating bugs, maybe you're pond fishing, try some sort of black popper. Now those are the poppers and the colors that I like to fish. Now I want to talk about how you work these bait, because there are, in my opinion, three main ways to work a popper. Now you're going to have, the first one is the typical popping sound. This is where you're going to cast this bait out and you're going to actually pop with your rod tip on slack line. What happens a lot of times when you pop a popper on slack line is it will make that bloop noise. It'll go bloop, bloop across the surface. Now, anytime that I'm fishing around bass that are eating bluegill, this is the action that I like. I like a slow blooping noise. Now, let's move on to the next way to fish them, and that is what I talked about a little bit earlier, and that's actually spitting the bait. Now, when you do this, you're gonna cast that popper out, but you're actually going to pop the popper on a taut line. You want your line to actually be tight and then pop it. And what happens is that will actually cause that popper to spit water about 2 or 3 foot in front of the bait. Now, when it spits that water, to me, it really resembles the minnows and the shad style bait fish that are out there. So if you are fishing around bass that are eating little minnows or eating shad, I really like to spit that bait. Now, the only other action that you're gonna have is a walking the dog. Similar to the way that you do it with a spook or a walking style topwater bait, you can do that with a popper, where you basically pop it, you know, small pops on slack line is gonna make this bait go boom, 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 boom in the water. Now, to me, this is something that I do a lot when I am target fishing with a popper. If I am casting this bait up against a stump that I can see, or a small grass patch, or a lay down log, or a dock, I like to walk this bait back and forth. It's a really deadly technique for me. Now, the last thing with working the bait that I want to talk about is speed, because you can fish all those different ways that I talk about, but you can do them at different speeds. One of my favorite ways ever to catch fish on a popper is actually spitting the bait, but I'm going to work it extremely fast. So I'm going to pop it on a tight line and I'm going to spit, 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 pause, spit, 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 pause. That is a, I'm telling you, if you don't try that, working that bait really, really fast across the water, it is a deadly technique, and you will spit it real quick and you will pause it and those fish will come unglued. It's really, really awesome. Now, again, there are times where I work this bait really, really slow. If I am fishing really slick, calm conditions, that is typically when I like to work a popper really, really slow. But the big thing is you just got to get out there and you just got to experiment. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is your rod and reel setup with a popper. And the first thing that I'm going to say is, if you're just getting started in bass fishing, don't worry so much always about the rod and reel. Just try to test out lures with the equipment that you got. For example, I used to fish a popper style bait with my open face or spinning reel with a 6.5 foot rod and 8 or 10 pound monofilament line, and that worked absolutely great. Now that I have a lot of rod and reels with me, I have a designated top water rod, and this is the one that I really, really like. This is a Bruin ELS reel. It's a 7.3-to-1 gear ratio reel, and I have 30 pound braided line to a 20-pound monofilament leader. And that's right, I said 20-pound line. A lot of guys think 20-pound is too heavy when it comes to smaller popper style baits, but I'm telling you what, the thing that I like about having that 20-pound mono is it's kind of twofold. One, if you're using straight braided line, the thing with a popper, if you fish it really slow, that bait will sit like this in the water. It sits a little bit tail down. And so what happens a lot, if this was braided line, is the braid will get wrapped around that front hook and you'll foul up your bait. You'll make a huge long cast out there, it'll get fouled up in a few pops, and now it's pretty much useless. So one thing that you can do, use that monofilament leader, and it really helps keep that line away from that hook. And the thicker line you use, like 20-pound, is really gonna help you keep that line away from the hook. The other thing that I like about having the mono is you have a little bit of stretch in this leader. You can see me pulling this line right now. There's a little bit of stretch. And when you're using treble hooked lures, I always like a little bit of give. I like a little bit of stretch so that they don't shake these baits, especially when I'm using a braided line as my main line that has zero stretch to it at all. Now, let's talk about the rod, because to me, the rod is probably the most critical part of this entire setup. When it comes to a rod, you want a rod that is a medium power, but you want it to have a very moderate action. And what I mean by moderate is it's going to bend a lot from kind of down here at the butt and halfway through all the way to the tip. That moderate action rod, when you pair it with braided line and a monofilament leader, is perfect for keeping those fish pegged. That's the big important thing with this particular bait that you want. Now, if you're using straight monofilament line, that mono has so much stretch that you can actually get away with having a little bit stiffer rod if you want. But when it comes to the braid to mono, like I fish this on all the time, you want some give. This particular rod is an Arc Invoker Pro. It's a 7-foot 2-inch rod, and again, I'm going to leave it down below. It's labeled as a regular action. It has more of that moderate action to it. This is a great combo. It's what I use all the time when I am popper fishing. So guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something about poppers, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and I will see you guys in the next video.